Good afternoon, everyone from Frankfurt, and to those online. I appreciate the DEC inviting myself on behalf of the Wyoming Stable Token Commission to talk about a project that we, as well as myself, are very passionate about, i.e. the Wyoming Stable Token Commission. Now, I am from New York, and generally New Yorkers talk very quickly, so I am going to try my best to slow it down so that my New York accent doesn't confuse and or irritate some of you in the room and online as well. But before I begin, I want to give some very important disclaimers. As government agency, as you know, all the opinions and views expressed by me here in this presentation are my own and don't necessarily reflect the commission or the commissioners. Nothing that I say here can be seen or construed as giving legal, financial, or tax advice. Major decisions from the commission will be made by the commission, typically in a public forum. And at this particular juncture, although we'll discuss it a little later, no blockchain has been selected at this time. With that said, let's talk a little bit about who I am. Hi, my name is Debra Brookes, and I am the first Chief Risk and Compliance Officer for the Wyoming Stable Token Commission. My position here began in September of 2024, so not that many months ago. But before that, I stayed for 10 years at an agency that maybe some of you know called the New York State Department of Financial Services. I held many positions, but my last position was Deputy Virtual Currency Chief and Head of Supervision, where I supervised at that time about 30 licensees, including Coinbase, as many of you know, Gemini, Paxos, Ripple, BitGo, and so forth. And before joining NYDFS, I was a federal prosecutor with the United States Department of Justice. So that's who I am. Now let's talk about who or what is the Wyoming Stable Token Commission. What's unique about our stable token, as opposed to the other stable tokens that you are hearing about on a daily basis that are new and existing, is that we endeavor to be the first government-issued stable token. And the goal is to have it fully functional and in circulation by summer of this year. In fact, an announcement was made yesterday in DC that our token, which is preliminarily called WIST, Wyoming Stable Token, was issued on testnets yesterday on 7 candidate blockchains. The goal, like most stable tokens, is to be fiat backed, to be on a public blockchain, and redeemable for $1 US. Now, why Wyoming? Now, I assume many of you here know where Wyoming is. If I asked you where it is on a map, you can point to it. Admittedly, I did not know as a kid, but I do know now as an adult. Wyoming is definitely west of New York and east of California, and it's not far from Denver, Colorado. But the WIST initiative was created over 40 pieces of legislation beginning in 2016. This main mission at that time was to create a new revenue stream for the state that had pretty dependent and predictable revenue streams, but wanted to expand it to include digital assets. And as you can see in this slide, over the next several years, Wyoming and the legislature issued over 40 pieces of legislation designed and culminated into the Wyoming Stable Token Act that was enacted in 2023, so not that long ago. But as you can see, the acts that were passed leading up to the Stable Token Act of 2023 kind of falls into 3 buckets. You have the property rights aspect, you have the privacy rights aspects, and you also have the entity structures. Wyoming, I believe, is the first state that allowed DAOs to become corporations. So I think that's very new and innovative for a state in Wyoming to have such a robust forward-thinking approach to digital assets and particularly stable tokens. And as I mentioned before, as part of the revenue diversification, the Wyoming Stable Token Act was enacted in 2023. Now, as I've heard in this room and other rooms throughout the day, that stable tokens is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And by all designs, now that we have an administration focused on stablecoin growth and crypto assets or digital assets overall, we can conceivably see $1 trillion in a short period of time. And thus, the reason why Wyoming is invested in creating and issuing a stable token. Now, this next part, I think Visa might disagree, but we believe and we take the position that stable tokens drive the majority of on-chain transactions, almost comparable to Visa. I'm going to talk a little bit about the structure of the Stable Token Commission. Again, created by an act in 2023 and comprises of 7 individuals. Now, really to demonstrate the significance and the importance of the commission, the commission is led by none other than Mark Gordon, the governor of the state of Wyoming. So as you can see, the commitment from Wyoming to have its governor, head of state, leading the commission. The commission is also led by 2 elected officials in addition to the governor. You have the treasurer and you have the auditor. In addition to the 3 elected officials, you also have 4 subject matter advisors who are key in the industry of finance, banking, accounting, and law. Another fun fact, the general counsel or former general counsel of Circle, the issuer of USDC, is one of the commissioners. We do have a budget, albeit not as robust as some other stable token issuers. We are small, but we are mighty. And so much so, I am here talking to you about the stable token issued by the state of Wyoming. We have been authorized by the Act to initiate a very robust procurement process. As you know, many of you may know about the process as everything, and I'll mention this later, probably more than once. Everything that we do is transparent. If you go on our website, you will see every meeting that the commission has, every decision that the commission has made. It is part of the Wyoming's belief in transparency. The citizens demand its government to be transparent, while at the same time wanting the highest level of privacy rights for its citizens. One of the, not even a challenge, but one of the assets that we are permitted to use as a reserve are cash, treasuries under 90 days, and repurchase agreements. Those are the only 3 assets by law we are required to invest in. So in listening to some of the discussions earlier, one of the concerns that was raised in certain presentations was trust and the lack of trust. By ensuring that your monies, if you buy with us, are limited to these largely secure assets, and I believe it's still safe to say that the U.S. Treasury is a particularly safe asset, that it will, if not build trust, but hopefully restore trust, and for whatever reasons people may have to distrust the government. Also, I mentioned earlier about the 9 candidate blockchains. 9 were selected, but as I said, as of yesterday, we issued on testnet on 7, including Ethereum, including Avalanche, and including Base. All of this, what I'm mentioning, is publicly available. If you type in Wyoming launch, you will see the full list of of the blockchains that the token was launched on. Now, as I mentioned before, transparency. Wyoming statute is very clear on demanding transparency from its government, and thus we are required to enact certain rules and regulations through that standard. We are very open. We are very transparent for a state. Also, by the Act, it requires us to be over-collateralized. Right now, the statute has a a floor, if you will, of 102% buffer. But we're also looking internally about expanding that buffer because we want to avoid the volatility within the market vis-a-vis inflows and outflows, but we also want to prevent any form of a depegging event. Ultimately, like any good government agency, we have a public good. And what that means is the monies or the excess of monies, income minus expenses, will go towards our school systems in the state of Wyoming. So ultimately, the beneficiaries will be the children and the students in the state of Wyoming. Pretty good, right? Now, the stable token, or WIST as we call it internally, will be released on a public blockchain. That blockchain has not been decided. So I want to repeat that. It can be settled for dollar denominations anywhere on that blockchain within seconds. Wyoming is really an incredible state for its size. Another fun fact, in addition to being the home of Yellowstone National Park, also appointed the first female governor. New York just elected its first female governor this century. Wyoming did it a century earlier. Again, Wyoming is still the first state when launched to issue a stable token, which distinguishes us, I believe, from every other stable token issuer globally. But like all stable coins, we want stability. To use the example, I'm sure many of you have heard an article that was written in the New York Times a while ago about how a person spent $60,000 for a slice of pizza. Now, of course, the price of a Bitcoin was not worth $60,000. It was worth a lot less, thus buying the pizza. But as we know, because of the volatility of Bitcoin and other altcoins, you don't want to spend a lot for a pizza. Thus, the idea and the conception of a stable token to hedge against volatility, making it suitable for everyday transactions. Again, as I mentioned previously, we have the 102% buffer, and that seems to be in line with industry standards. I was with NYDFS when we drafted the stablecoin guidance, and I was in those rooms, and I was part of those discussions. And having that 2% reserve buffer really is a key difference in avoiding major depegging events. And I said this, and I still feel like I say, even though I'm no longer with the agency, we have not had a stablecoin issuer that is regulated by the New York DFS go under as a result of these pretty robust requirements. Recognizing that I'm not in the US, but talking about the US, we do have a pretty robust debt, and I'll just leave it there. And recognizing also that fiat-backed stable tokens, as requiring treasuries, really can help spur growth in the treasury market and really mitigate risk against any failed treasury auctions. I think someone also mentioned it earlier, about 90% of foreign exchange are settled in US dollars. But we also recognize that there are BRIC nations, that includes Brazil and the Russian Federation, that are seeking to be their own dominant players in the digital asset space or even in the financial sector. A digitized US dollar can also help and facilitate easy FX settlements and protect nation states and international players as well. Now, with every promise, there are challenges. Interestingly enough, I was talking to someone who's in this room about the lack of transparency in many of the discussions that we have. As a former regulator, as someone who's in the government, all we get is the good. They give us the presentation, oh, this is great, Deb, everything is great, rainbows and sunshines, and you just ask that one question and you kind of see the house of cards kind of fall. But for us here in the US, we do have challenges. From the first one being US regulation, There is none, not a comprehensive federal framework. It's been long overdue. We do have the Stable Act and the Genius Act currently in legislation, and the players or the representatives there are very committed to get some type of regulatory regime in place. Right now, the way the Genius Act and the Stable Act is written only applies to private entities. We're going to get clarity on that, but as of now, we are under the impression that it does not apply to state entities who are considering stablecoin issuance or those who are absolutely going to issue stable tokens like us. Another challenge is more on the state of Wyoming, not necessarily a national, which means for an agency, we have to commence rules. And rulemaking or regulatory or reg writing is a pretty lengthy process. Wyoming is no different. And the agency rules requires us to have at least a 45 business day public comment. As with any other asset or any other product in the digital space, you also have to have a robust security. Because as you know, you're as good as you're strong as your weakest defense. And if your technology is lacking, then as you can see, as we read, you're going to witness hacks, you're going to witness exploits, you're just going to see a host of problems that will befall your agency. And another challenge, again, interestingly enough, in one of the panel discussions earlier that I sat in on, talked about education and the importance of it and educating people. When someone asks me what's a Bitcoin? I'm like, that's too long of a story, but if you really want the 3-minute version, I tell them to go on YouTube and type in The Simpsons, I'm not kidding, The Simpsons and Bitcoin. It is a great explanation on, if you want to explain to anyone what Bitcoin is, that is the perfect explanation, and I highly recommend it, and now it's on the record, I recommend it. See, I don't have much time left, but use cases. And again, we've been discussing throughout the day the prospective use cases, institutional, retail, as well as international. For me, and on behalf of, or as a representative rather, of the state of Wyoming, we start local, but I think forward and I think global, thus being here. So we see the stable token being used in stores for purchasing products on the retail perspective, but we also recognize that it would have very strong use and utility in the DeFi space. So we envision the stable token to encompass me at a supermarket buying a cup of coffee versus me buying it and using it as part of a DeFi protocol. Next steps. Actually, it's happening right now. We have engaged in at least 7 qualifying vendors who are very robust and extensive RFP or request for proposal process. As I mentioned more than once, we have partnered with Layer 0, who have helped us launch on testnet our WISC token on 7 candidate blockchains. The goal is to release and to have into the wild, as we say internally, by this summer for a fully launched stable token. And we're not just limiting ourselves to one blockchain. It is our intention, or the commission's intention rather, to expand into multiple blockchains. So to scale as quickly as possible, but also, and I can't stress this enough, in a safe manner that protects your assets and also protects consumers. In the 25 seconds I have left, please stay in touch. If you click on this QR code, it will pull you to the Wyoming Stable Token Commission's website. As I said, we are very transparent. Everything, including the commission meetings, which are recorded, are listed in this website. And with that, I will say thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good day.
So thank you so much. Any questions?
Oh, okay.
So Oh, wow, it's really loud. I don't know if you are able to answer this, so no worries if not. But I was just wondering, because you mentioned thinking about it as a global use case as well, and obviously completely understand limitations around backing assets for a state level stable coin. What do you think, though, about potentially, the stable Wyoming stable token, but denominated in another currency? Because we also talked about earlier, the need to have local currency for local treasuries and things like that. Do you think that's something that for the future could be a hypothetical?
Well, again, this is my own opinion and not of the commission's. Obviously,
Totally fair.
we are a state within the United States. So, of course, in the first instance, the fiat would be US dollar. I believe that's consistent with 90% of the stablecoin use cases. But that doesn't mean down the road, as we are in the $1 trillion phase of stable token issuance, we can look into other denominations besides US dollar.
I think it would be really cool and competitive.
Yes.
So let's see what happens in the future.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for the really interesting presentation. Again, on the topic of the global use cases for the Wyoming Stable Token, how are you working with other global regulators or keeping an eye on what's happening in other jurisdictions to ensure that in the future WIST is usable in other jurisdictions as they introduce their own stablecoin regimes and potentially requirements for, foreign issued stablecoins and things like that?
Thank you for the question. For starters, having me here, talking to people like yourself and listening to other presentations and understanding the landscape. We travel, whether locally or internationally, to have those conversations and not just limit ourselves to the state of Wyoming. We recognize that for us to scale and scale rapidly and safely, we can't limit ourselves to the four corners of Wyoming. We want global adoption, and such. We do talk to regulators, not only within the United States but also in Europe. Yeah.
Sorry. So which one would be your? Who would you? Who?
Oh,
would,
I'm sorry. I was looking at her.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. So
Sorry.
my question is if I buy a stable coin from you, who is my counterparty? Is my counterparty actually the state of Wyoming? Are you guaranteeing it entirely as the state of Wyoming, or is it only guaranteed up to the assets that sits of the 102%? Or how does this how strong a stable coin do we have here in terms of coverage?
Well, in terms of coverage, you're kind of asking like a two-part question, so I'll try to answer it in two parts. One, we are not dealing directly with you, so you could not, as a retailer, approach us. We, because of staffing, because there's only 5 of us, and you're meeting 25% of the staff today, 20%. I need to do math. Yes, math. Well, never mind. 20%. Yeah, I know. It is late in the day. 20% of the staff you're meeting. So you would have to go to an exchange and buy from them. So our counterparty would be the exchanges, for example, or resellers in general, if that makes sense.
Okay, so the stability of it's going to be handled by market makers and stuff like that,
Potentially, yes.
rather than a direct sort of
Directly,
against
yes.
you.
You would not, as a
I'd not be able to call the state of
No.
Wyoming and say, God, I need my dollar back.
No, you would call hopefully Coinbase and order the Wyoming Stable Token from them. I'm just using Coinbase as an example.
Okay, and there's no redemption guarantees.
There is, because the statute requires redemption, but there are exceptions up to the dollar, but there are like limited exceptions. If the Treasury Department, for example, folds. So obviously
Sure.
we couldn't, so that's just one example, but the rule is, or the act dictates, you gave us $1, we have to redeem you back $1. Generally, but minus those exceptions I mentioned.
Okay, but via Coinbase or other types of...
Generally, yes. Your redemption process would be through the resellers, yes. And I think to your second question, the Wyoming it's not like the US dollar, where the US dollar is backed by full faith and credit. It's a special purpose. But the act does require us to redeem for $1. Oh, hot bench.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think we have one more.
We may take the last question. Yeah, please. Go.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the session and the presentation today. You obviously have first mover advantage. You don't currently have federal legislation in the US. Do you see there being a risk and to what you have proposed and how you're structuring your stablecoin, depending on what comes out of the federal jurisdictional layer?
Well, as you know, the United States do have a dualism where the federal and the state entities run parallel and largely independent of each other with, of course, exceptions. What we plan, and we have been monitoring the Stable Token and Genius Acts, and currently we are not worried about interfering with our federal partners. We want to work, as always, collaboratively with them and ensure that we are not running afoul against any rules and regulations that they enact, even if we are not subject to them. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you.
One more?
Yeah.
Oh, I said one more. Okay. Was this like the
yeah.
most active of questions today? You can lie if you're
So,
Okay, thanks.
yeah. So how do you think the regulations can help to mitigate the, for example, money laundering and sanction risk when it comes to stablecoin use cases?
So your question is, let me see if I understand your question. How do the regs help with compliance?
Yes, compliance to money laundering and sanction standards. How the regulations of stablecoins can help with that?
Well, that's what I'm working on, ensuring that our rules really are consistent with FATF, with the BSA AML rules, because as I said, one of the concerns as an agency is reputational risk to the state of Wyoming. You just don't want to hear that your stable token is used in illicit activities, that it is part of CSAM, terrorist financing, and so forth. So as for me, as my role is, and I've been working on this and having those conversations, is to come up with a protocol that will ensure that not only the right person uses our stable token, but uses it in a legal and safe manner. Thank you.
Thank
No
you
more
so
questions,
much.
or just?
Yeah. Yeah, we are running of time.
I think we're out of time, but I'll stick around if you have any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this insightful presentation. Yeah.